Hi, everyone. I can't think of a better way to start a week on a Monday to bring to you the final session of the breakout sessions of the Transforming Education in Africa Summit. And like the previous week's sessions that we had, we're bringing forward to make sure that we all understand who the finalists of the this year's Africa Educational Medal are. And these are some of the most inspiring people I've met who are change makers, who are being recognized for their leadership, their impact, and advocacy to make sure that education is for all, and the lifetime's work is what we are recognizing over here. And so, without further ado, I want to bring forward two exceptional candidates for the Africa Educational Medal today and have a conversation with them in which we engage with them. But before I do that, please know that we are watching you, and you should go on to any of our social platforms and tell us where you're watching from. It's always a great way, and it's a great motivator, I know, when people see that friends from all over the world are tuning in and engaging with the subject matter. And so please tell us where you're from. My name is Vikas. I live in London. It's quite gray outside, I can tell you, which is, I know I wouldn't, it's usually what happens in the winter, but this summer we've had an exceptional summer already. We have sunshine all day long, but for now, for some reason, the sun has gone in. But the point I'm making to you is the sun is up somewhere in the world, and we should be basking under it, because we have two amazing change makers from Africa who are going to join us. So without further ado, please welcome Mary Metcalf from South Africa and Martha Muwezi, who is right now in Kenya but is Ugandan in origin. Hello, ladies.
Hi, Vikas.
Fantastic. So I actually just want to start off, I had a really great conversation this weekend with someone, and we were talking about overnight successes, and the reality is that I don't know any overnight successes. People and things have happened over a long period of time to get them to where they are, and you keep on building and building and building. And both of your professional backgrounds and passion projects and everything that you've exerted your energy on spans decades and not just minutes or seconds, which is in today's TikTok generation, people expect to be an overnight hit. And so what I want to do is I actually want to talk a little bit about what has brought you to the position that you're in today, where we are congratulating you, we are recognizing your work, and I want to talk about some of the experiences that you've had that have forged this indelible passion for education. I want to go first to Mary. Mary, I mean, we've known each other for a couple of years, and your reputation is obviously of huge. Everyone knows you, is what I'm trying to say, because of your background. But if I'm not mistaken, you were a teacher when you first started. And how does a teacher progress to becoming? You were the education minister for your province in South Africa for a decade. You've done a bunch of other things, and today you run an NGO called Pilo. Tell us a little bit about that journey, please.
Vika, I started teaching as an unqualified teacher in 1974.
Wow, so that's the year I was born.
And next year I'm going to be celebrating, because I really have been very privileged to have a very broad range of experiences and opportunities to learn. And I'm not an expert in anything because I've done so much. I started off really in remedial education as a teacher assistant. And then I studied, and then I did work in special ed formally. And then I was pulled into teacher education, where I was at a teacher's college for several years before joining University of the Witwatersrand. But during the 1980s, I was active in the anti-apartheid struggle. And I always have insisted on working in education. That was a period of enormous learning. And I was very active in the African areas, which we call townships. And from that, I was pulled into developing the ANC education policy prior to liberation in 1994. So when they assembled the provincial cabinet, they made me become the provincial education minister. And after that, I went on to Wits back again to amalgamate the university and the college. And a long story is my current work has been going on for nearly about 8 years, and I have learned even more about changing the system, working within and the complexities. I wish I'd known that 20 years ago or so when I was the MEC.
And so tell me though, Mary, in terms of if there was one massive lesson that you'd like to perhaps shed a spotlight on or put a spotlight on in terms of how you make change, what would that be? Just one. Just one.
Just one. Okay, not to try and do too much. When we started designing our program to improve learning outcomes, there were so many things that I said, all of these are essential. Socio-emotional supply, having adequate resources in school. And the people that I was designing with, one of my colleagues in particular said, Mary, you can only do 3 things if you want to really focus on change. And that was hard. I think I didn't listen carefully enough, and we tried more. But all of the time, it's been a greater focus on what are the essential elements to change. And I suppose it's also about sequencing.
Well, that's a second lesson. We'll come to that in a second. Martha, I want to bring you in if that's okay. So Martha, you run an organization called FAWE, which is entirely focused upon gender responsiveness and in education. And the organization has been running for a very long time, and you've also been associated for a very long time. Tell us about your work, Martha.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Vikas, and thank you, Mary. It's nice listening to your journey. I've worked with the FAWE now for close to 20 years. I started my journey with FAWE in 2005. And at that time, I was working as a technical advisor with the FAWE Uganda chapter. And thereafter, I became the executive director of FAWE Uganda chapter. In 2012, I was promoted to the head office as a program officer in charge of 18 countries that FAWE operates in. In 2014, I became head of programs in FAWE Africa. And in 2019, I became the executive director of FAWE. And I keep telling people that in my life, I've worked for only 2 organizations. My first organization was Christian Children's Fund. I worked there for about 10 years. Then I joined FAWE, a journey that I've had for quite close to 20 years. And it has been fulfilling work, if I can put it that way, in that women and girls education became my breakfast, my lunch, and my dinner. And the whole struggle was to see, how do we create equality? How do we create equity at all aspects and at all levels? And this was a reflection back. There are certain things that happen to you when you're young. And at times you may not know what it is, you may not take it seriously. But as you grow up, you begin realizing the unfairness. You begin realizing the discrimination. You begin discovering so many things that you may not have seen at that time. And that's the kind of thing that pushed me into really advocating for women and girls' education. I would reflect back home. And I always say I'm one of the lucky women because my father was gender sensitive. He treated all his children, both boys and girls, without discrimination. But looking at all the other families in the village where I grew up, many of the girls, I think I could say I was the second girl to go to university in my entire village. And that meant a lot to me, and it opened my eyes. And as I work for FAWE, I've served millions of girls. And that's what makes me value myself as a person that has contributed to many lives, a person that has changed lives. And FAWE as an institution has touched lives. And we have done this, of course, with support of partners. We've done many of the work in collaboration, in partnership. I personally value partnership and collaboration because it's what has made FAWE achieve what we have achieved for the last 30 years. Thank you.
Well, Martha, partnership, I think, is a really big component of all our work. The challenge is so large that no one organization or individual can actually possibly think about addressing it by themselves. But when we talk about partnership, at T4, we also talk about our community. And here we have, as an example, people watching from all over the world. We have, as far away as Argentina. We have Ithram in Kuwait, who's taking part. Hanan, who is in Libya, Alejandra in Argentina, Stephen in Nigeria. We have Saad, who is in Morocco. We have Tessa in Cape Town. Hello, Vikas, for your time. It's not my time. It's these two incredible changemakers that we're celebrating. We have Vicky Powell from the US, which is fantastic. Jobert, who is a known quantity, connecting from Finland. Thank you so much. I don't know who you are. I can't see your name, but thank you for joining from Canada. Alexander is saying, hello, Mary. Lucelle is from the Netherlands. Well, this is a response to my comment. Akara is actually quite great today. Well, I'm glad we're not by ourselves. Let's put it that way. Francis is from Uganda, Martha. Here you go. You've got another person from Europe, Iceland, which is fantastic. And Emily from Nairobi. Thank you so much. Felton from Liberia. Dan Kimati from Kenya is saying, it is quite inspiring as a teacher from Africa to see how concerned the world is about education status in Africa. It's a great move. Well, no, it's the right thing to do. You're following from Uganda. And here we go. I mean, it just goes on and on, which is fantastic, right? And this is the community that we want to see, that who have turned up to pay homage to you and to recognize your work. So, Martha, I go back to the question that I do want to ask is about, in Africa, I was reading a BBC report not so long ago, which talked about if everything goes well, the earliest that all girls will be enrolled is something like in 50 or 60 years' time. I mean, what response do you have to that?
Yeah, my response is based on my understanding, and that simply says there are so many barriers to girls' education. There are so many roadblocks to girls' education, and these vary from cultural aspects, traditions, it goes into perspectives, it goes to attitudes, and it goes to infrastructure. And all that needs to be tackled if we are to have all girls get into school. And that's why the projection of the 50, 60 years means there is a lot that needs to be dealt with if we are to have every girl in school. And we usually talk, it's not just getting into school, but getting into school, keeping into school, completing the education cycle, and performing well. And all this is a journey. So there is getting in and getting out. We have not achieved. But if we can get everybody get in and sustained in education, completes, joins the world of work, and contributes to the development of the different nations, that would be a plus. So in other words, because the challenges are enormous. I know there are also many key players into the same, but you move one step forward, you're taking one step back. Just make reference to the COVID, which was just for 2 years, but it had a lot of negative impact on many girls. Just in one county in Kenya, over 4,000 girls were pregnant within a period of 4 months. It was a setback. Even what we had achieved, we were pushed back to the drawing board to now see what needs to be done. And that calls upon each and every person. And that's why it can take that many years, because of the challenges. Yeah, thank you.
And tell us, Martha, about the role that FAWE plays in advancing this agenda, because what is it that Fawe and you require as its leader to
Mhm.
advance your goals?
Yeah, the role that FAWE plays, there are enormous roles, but one is advocacy. And in advocacy, we advocate with different key stakeholders in education. We advocate with government. When we are talking about issues of policy, we work closely with government because there are some of the interventions that call for policy enactment. Without a policy, we can't push back. I'll give one of the examples of re-entry policy for pregnant girls, giving them a second chance to get into schools. It's a policy issue, and it takes a lot to have those policies passed. A number of countries in Africa have passed those policies, but some of the countries have not yet. So we do a lot of advocacy. And the other thing that we do as FAWE is demonstrating what works. What does it take to keep a girl in school? What does it take to have the girl complete her education level? What does it take to have the girl perform well? What does it take to make sure that there's gender equity and equality in education? So we do what we call demonstrative interventions. We do a lot of research. And when we do research, the data backs up our advocacy work. We work with different partners that we bring on board. Most important, we empower the young girls themselves to participate and contribute to their own development, because we believe there is nothing for them without them. So we put the young girls at the front line. And what we do, we have an empowerment program, which is, excuse me, which is a Swahili word which says tuseme. Tuseme means speaking out, because one of the researchers reveals that many of the girls will not say no and mean no. You will know, say yes, you're meaning no. And you're saying no, you're meaning yes. So that empowerment creates a lot of empowerment. It builds their self-esteem. It makes them assertive. It makes them demand for their rights. So as FAWE, we focus on policy, we focus on advocacy, we focus on empowerment of the young people themselves, and we focus on working with different partners to bring the issues on the table. Yeah.
Thank you. Mary, I want to bring you in here. Up to the beginning of the pandemic, so the end of 2019, I left a pretty significant job role where, I had to consider what I wanted to do next. And T4 is an expression of that, where, I started thinking about, well, what are the things that I learned during my tenure and that I would do differently, but actually build upon to get greater effectiveness and still continue on that mission of making sure that we drive better education outcomes. In a similar vein, I mean, we've heard that you were a regional provincial education minister for Gauteng in South Africa for 10 years, and then you've gone on and done this for 8 years. Tell us, what is the difference that you have made in that time? Tell us about your organization, what it's focused on, and what you think the essential difference you're making is.
Such an interesting question, Vikas, because, when you work at system level, and particularly when you have the power and authority to suggest changes, determine policy, advocate for policy, there's this term that I've learned, which is magical thinking. That because the policy is there, because the guidelines are there, because the people that are meant to implementing it are there, you kind of think that it's done, that, imperfectly done. But the greatest learning that I've had from trying to drive a change management program to improve learning outcomes is that the capabilities of the people with whom you're working have to be deeply engaged, because they know their context. They filter all of this policy and instruction through the reality both of what they already believe works and through the contextual constraints of where they are. So you may have an elaborate monitoring and evaluation framework, a clear theory of change, a clear goal, but the importance of listening and understanding the ways in which people are you need to encourage them to take the rules and make them into principles which have been adapted to their circumstances. very few people are now, working at national level now with the work I'm doing. There's an assumption that because an instruction has gone out, it's therefore been implemented. And very few people at national level have a sense of the constraints across the silos of the department. So working on scale gives you a sense of how the components of the system, ambitious as they are, don't really necessarily cohere, interconnect, and are experienced by the people who are meant to implement them at school and district level as a coherent whole. There's so much I've learned, because.
And so tell us about your organization then.
So PILO was set up in a collaboration. We realized in about 2011 our national NEDLAC, the organization, the links between government and social partners and unions, admitted things are not working in education as they should. So a range of NGOs who've been working in education, a range of funders and the unions came together to say, can we not bring what we've learned into a program that's the components of which have already been shown to work, and give this to government to implement. So we always had principles that I feel very privileged that we were persuaded to take up. So the one is, you always locate responsibility where responsibility must remain in order for the initiative to be sustained. Because so many external interventions come in and almost demonstrate with the department watching, whereas you want the department to implement, and that's been a huge learning. The second thing that we were always quite clear about is that it has to be on scale. You can work in 5 schools, 10 schools, 30 schools, but then they sort of are separated from the system and the learning isn't integrated. So we have focused, it's changed. Our original theory of change was, if you support teachers through the school management teams to cover the curriculum, you will therefore cover the curriculum and learning will improve. That was, in theory of change language, what the evaluation experts were telling us. But I started fiddling and meddling with the theory of change early on, because it's not that mechanical, it's not that linear, and it certainly is much more about accessing the agency of the teachers, empowering them. So yes, learning outcomes will improve if teachers are empowered and have agency to interpret the guidelines in context of the realities of the learners that they're working with. So we've worked in the whole of several provinces in the country, the whole of KZN, the whole of the Free State, the whole of Gauteng, one district in the Northern Cape, and now we're moving into Mpumalanga and taking all of the learning with us as we grow. And then, of course, I also have been using that learning because the National Department of Education asked me to chair a learning recovery program. And it was such a wonderful opportunity to bring all of that knowledge in, work with the different provinces, and focus on how we center on teachers facilitating learning, and that the systemic support for that is what is key.
Well, Mary, that was pretty inspiring, and there's a lot of comments that have come in, which I'll go through in a second. I do want to ask both of you one question to conclude on, which is, I do believe that leaders have to be able to speak about failure as well. And so we've talked about your learnings in terms of, well, what is the one thing that creates change? I also want to ask you, from your professional backgrounds and everything you've tried, what has been your biggest failure? But before we do that, and Martha, I'm coming to you first for that one. And so before I do, I want to show you some more messages. So here you have Felton, who says, to creating equality is the best path in order to have everyone. Absolutely. This is one of your colleagues, Susan from Uganda, says hi. Arthur from Abidjan in the Ivory Coast saying hello. This is a hero of mine, Mary, Marge Brown, who you may know in Cape Town, an incredible teacher from South Africa. Alejandra says, terribly exciting, not terrible exciting, but terribly exciting hearing you, Martha. Mars goes on to say, and teachers need to be sensitive to gender bias in classroom too. I think that's to your points, Martha. Here we have a friend from Somalia, which is fantastic, and Widad from Morocco, which is fantastic. And Alejandra absolutely puts the nail on the head. Your story and obstacles jump daily are impressive. Thank you so much. Felton talks about the role of inclusion of the guiding principle in the empowerment evaluation is the best way to go. Absolutely. And again, Halandra, like paraphrases what you said, which is the importance of listening and communication, which is fantastic. Now, I don't know who this is, but it's a Stephen Barden viewing from France. So we didn't know it's Stephen Barden. Mary's point about the lack of coordination, intentional and otherwise, a vital perception for anyone trying to implement change. Absolutely spot on. And Tessa says, spot on, Mary. Tarek talks about welcome from Egypt. It's great to see our Egyptian friends, being here. And again, Marge goes, Mary is also my hero, 100% Marge. And we have Carolina, who is from Buenos Aires, and one of my colleagues. So there we have, you can see a truly global picture of those that are engaging with you and your organizations and your subject. But Martha, go back to that very tricky question that I asked. What do you consider your biggest failure?
Yeah, it is a big question, Vikas, like you say. But looking at it from the FAWE perspective, I think what we would consider as our biggest failure is failure to end child marriages, failure to end early and unwanted pregnancies among girls. Because for the last 30 years, it has been the campaign. But as you stop it here, it's still unearthed. And it's one of the biggest challenges that we face. And we are still thinking in terms of what are the most appropriate strategies for us to address this pandemic. I refer to it as a pandemic because it has been on for years. We've failed to treat it. But that having been said, it is a failure, but we've not given up. We've not accepted. We have to continue and put in strategies and come up with innovations, call on to the different people so that we make sure that girls' education is not interrupted because of early and unwanted pregnancies. I consider that as a failure because, thank you.
And Mary, your work and your biggest failure?
I'm sure there's so many, but if I focus on this one, to change a system as a whole, you need to have the system as a whole focusing. And the political administrative interface is complex. And the officials tend to be distracted by the current, perhaps whimsical, but political concerns of their superiors. So to keep on telling the story of change in a way in which it is apprehended as impacting on the concerns of both politicians and the senior administrators, and all of the complexity of that is crucial. And I wasn't always able to do that. We ended up, I think, for many years working very much at district level, and I would greet the senior administrators and politicians, but they weren't driving it. And if you're going to embed the lessons, it has to be driven right from the top. Fortunately now, we're going to be giving a whole sort of suite of tools and instruments for them to take forward. But you don't want the work you've done to dissipate after you've left. It has to be embedded in the system and sustained. And to keep that focus is hard.
So thank you for sharing that both. You've both been shortlisted for this Africa Educational Medal. And whilst I've always said and maintained from the beginning that such mechanisms are brutal because there's often one winner, I consider all 10 of you to be incredible change makers, and I really do applaud you for your work. And I'm glad that we've been able to put together this kind of initiative where we showcase your work. Since you've been announced, maybe you can speak a little bit about what has been your experience as to what's been happening. Martha, you and I, before this went live, we talked and touched a little bit. Why don't you share a little bit as to all the different great things that may have happened?
Yeah, thanks, Vikas. For me, I believe even being among the 10 finalists is recognition of the work that we've done. And like I mentioned to you, I think it is very critical to recognize people, to recognize the works that have done. And it should be a continuous process. And from the time of the announcement, I think there are two things that I can allude to. The first one is sitting down and reflecting on the impact that we have created on the lives of many. It has been a game changer. Many girls have been touched. And when this was announced, that's when I got a lot of communication from people, both from the networks and outside the net, some of whom I didn't know. But that's when everybody realized the great work that FAWE has done over the years. And for me, that was amazing. And the second issue after the announcement, you know, it's always good to hear what people say about you when you're still living. Not only the good things when you're gone, but it was a recognition. I know many people have mentioned it before. My board has always praised me for the work that I do, but this was like an eye-opener, even to me myself, to realize the kind of impact that I've created over the years. And I want to thank you, Vikas, and your team for doing this, and let it be done for many more. I know I'm here, Mary's here, the 10 are here, but I know there are thousands out there that are also doing good work, and it's good to recognize them. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Martha. And Mary, any comments from you?
Yeah, just I've enjoyed doing all the media work, and what I've enjoyed is saying why this prize is so important is because it puts a spotlight on education and amazing people in the continent doing wonderful work. Because, too often education gets all the bad press. It's education's fault that learners are pregnant or whatever the current malaise is. So I've in fact had fun because sometimes I've been able to speak more about the other panelists and myself because we want to celebrate all of these amazing leaders.
Well, we set up the Africa Education Medal in partnership with HP and Microsoft, without whom it wouldn't be possible. Because, I struggled in terms of when I think about, you can talk about doom and gloom all day long, frankly. But when I come across a Mary Metcalf or a Martha Muwezi, I am blown away. And I'm just thinking all this doom and gloom, if only we could give more muscle or more resource or more goodwill or create a change where people believe more in your missions. I think that's a very powerful thing to do. And as part of our philanthropy and our efforts, I see the Africa Education Medal fanning change. The one thing that I always get fed up of, and this is from my youth, is when someone goes and cites someone from history, an historical figure, and so, well, we don't need to go that far. We have the Mandelas of today in front of us, who are doing incredible work. And Mary and Martha and all the other Africa Education medalists, you are equally to be recognized for this incredible work that you have put in a lifetime commitment, not just an overnight thing. Your track records are there for everyone to be seen. On that note, I bid everyone farewell by saying thank you so much for participating in this session, and I look forward to the next opportunity. We announced the recipient of this year's Africa Education Medal on the 6th of July. So please, everyone, be watching and be awaiting it. But regardless and nonetheless, our effort in showcasing and spotlighting incredible leaders continues, and all power to all 10 of you for everything you have done. On that note, goodbye, everyone. Final note from you, Mary and Martha. Final goodbye.
Martha, you go.
Yeah, the goodbye goes to everybody that has been watching, and I also want to thank each and every person in a special way, because I know in one way or another, many people out there are contributing to education, either through policy, either through research, either through media and everything. So my thank you goes to each and every person.
Well, goodbye, everyone, and we wish you well. Bye-bye.
Thank you.